All right. Hello, everybody. Super excited, really super excited. Have a guest on today, and Don is coming in from Scotland. And I've known Don a while through Facebook. We've done some videos together before. And Don and I share a very unique mission, mission of sustainability, a mission of pure food. But Don's taking it to the next level, because when you think about people that are out there making a lot of noise about the salmon farming industry, Don is probably at the top of that list. So Don, welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon, good evening.
So tell us how you got started in this. And then we'll talk about the world's most toxic food, of course, because that's what I like to call scamming. And but tell us how you got started and doing all this, and where you live, and what your community is like and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've been campaigning against salmon farms for 25 years. I started as a PhD student, environmental science. So I encountered people like Dr. John Volpe and Alexander Morton. And I've worked with environmental groups in Scotland, in the United States, in Canada, in Norway, traveled to Australia, Chile, and the common denominator really all around the world is salmon farming is unsustainable. It's got environmental side effects, and then from a food safety point of view, it's producing a product that is unhealthy, it's fatty, it's contaminated. And I'm really glad that the New York Times this week has a podcast, an audio podcast, featuring the new book, The New Fish, with Norwegian journalists exposing the issue of salmon farming. And really, the big key change for me was back in 2016 with Alexandra Morton in British Columbia. She put a hidden camera on a stick, on a telescopic pole inside a salmon farm. So she revealed the hidden truth about salmon farming. And 3 years later, Pamela Anderson jumped on a salmon farm in Canada, and we've been filming for the last 5 years in Scotland. So we've got myself, and there's other people across Scotland doing filming at salmon farms, filming with drones. And what we're effectively doing is we're lifting the lid. Sometimes that's literally. You may have seen some footage that is in Netflix's Seaspiracy, where I climb a skip full of dead, diseased salmon. That's at Maui. That's a salmon farm that's been greenwashed by the Aquaculture Stewardship Council. So we're going out in kayaks, and we're flying drones, and we're doing all sorts of things to expose the ugly truth of salmon farming in Scotland.
Great. So I don't think people really understand how deplorable salmon farms are. I know if an average consumer were to drive by a beef farm, cattle ranch, and see 2 out of every 10 cattle dead lying in the field there because of the toxicity, and see these open lesions on all the cattle and all this kind of stuff, we wouldn't eat meat anymore. Most of us would be like, I'm not going to eat that meat. That's disgusting. What's really happening? Can you tell us what's really happening under the salmon in those salmon farms that the average person can't see? I mean, there's pictures behind you there of a salmon with looks like a lesion, something on its head. Looks like there's some dead stuff back there. So what's really happening when you and Alexandra Morton, when you're going in, and other people are going into these salmon farms and seeing what's in the nets?
You raise a very good point. The salmon farms get away with murder. They're getting away with stuff that wouldn't be tolerated on land, because it's a case of out of sight, out of mind. They're operating underneath the water. So what we're doing is we're going out in kayaks. Some people, there's a guy called Corin Smith in Scotland. He swims out to salmon farms with flippers. So we're putting cameras inside cages and showing the public the hidden truth about salmon farming, just like animal rights activists for PETA break into pig farms or chicken farms. Compassion Over Killing, which is Animal Outlook, several years ago, they went undercover in a salmon farm, a cook-owned salmon farm in Maine, a land-based salmon farm, and they uncovered a whole series of animal welfare breaches. So what we're doing is we're telling consumers that they shouldn't buy this product because it's a triple whammy. It's an animal welfare issue, it's an environmental health issue, and it's a public health issue. So there's a whole suite of reasons why we should be steering clear of this product, farm salmon, which I say not with an F but with a PH, because it's factory farming. They're given toxic chemicals, artificial colorings. So we should avoid it like the proverbial plague.
Talk about the mortality rate, just in general, how it blankets every salmon region, and talk a little bit about the Scottish mortality rate, and just enlighten people about that.
In Norway, the Norwegian government publish an annual report, and there's maybe 50 or 60 million dead farm salmon. There's also millions of cleaner fish. These are the wrasse and the lumpfish sent into salmon farms to clean house, to clean away the parasites. In Scotland, for the last 10 years, the Scottish salmon farming industry, which I call the Sal Mafia, they've refused to publish full data on the numbers of dead fish. They claim disclosure of that information will be commercially damaging, so it will affect their share price. So we've managed to flush out some information. The latest data from 2022, over 16 million farm salmon died on the farms. That was double the previous year. In terms of percentage, about 25%, so that's 1 in 4, are dying in the sea phase of production in Scotland on salmon farms, and maybe another 25% in land-based systems in the hatcheries before they get released as smolts in the sea. So that's maybe 1 in 2, so maybe 50% mortality. Some sea cage salmon farms, it's 80% mortality. So we're seeing monthly data, we're seeing weekly data, but we can't see the true figures because the industry don't want to disclose that information because the public just would not buy their product. But I think what we're seeing is we're seeing greater awareness of the dangers, the health risks, the environmental risks, the animal welfare risks of salmon farming. And the BBC, like the CBC or CBS in America, the BBC, the state broadcaster, on prime time just on Sunday, screened video footage shot inside salmon farms, which was pretty gruesome and horrific. And it was in the Sun newspaper, like the New York Post, a tabloid. So I think people are becoming more aware. There's more news articles, and the industry in Scotland is dead in the water. There's a perfect storm of rising temperatures. You've got climate change, you've got a marine heat wave, you've got toxic algal blooms, you've got lice infestation, increased incident of diseases, you've got gill problems, you've got welfare problems, and you've got mass mortality. So Scotland might be too warm a place to be farming salmon. We shouldn't be farming salmon at all, but Scotland is in the vanguard of this mass mortality events.
Tell us about what happens in these communities here in these bays when you have these algae blooms, when the fish die off. Like, what are the locals actually experiencing?
You've got locals, they're revolting. They're revolting against salmon farming. It might provide jobs, but what about jobs in the fishing industry, in the tourist industry? People don't want to come to Scotland to see and smell these trucks of dead salmon. Some ferry companies have banned the trucks which contain these dead, stinky salmon from traveling on certain crossings, because they're just putting off the tourists. But does Scotland want a healthy tourist economy, a healthy wild fishing economy, or does it want this disease-ridden, predominantly foreign-owned welfare nightmare that, there's jobs now, but there may not be jobs in salmon farming in Scotland in the next 5-10 years. And these Norwegian companies, these Faroese companies, and these Canadian companies, Cook Aquaculture, for example, are they're profiting at the expense of the Scottish environment and at the expense of locals and the future of jobs. And you could say what I'm saying about Scotland in all the other jurisdictions, in Norway, in Chile, in the Faroes, in Iceland, in Tasmania. There was a book, Richard Flanagan's book Toxic, which talked all about salmon farming in Tasmania. So the problems are exactly the same around the world, but the names of the chemicals might differ, the names of the diseases might differ, the mortality rates might be slightly different. But the bottom line is this is an industry that is running on empty. It's dead in the water. It's producing a product that's unhealthy. It's inherently unsustainable, and we should be boycotting that product. And thankfully, the tide is turning against salmon farming, and more people are becoming aware, thanks to books like The New Fish, Toxic, Alexandra Morton's book, Not on My Watch, and Salmon Wars, which was authored by people in Eastern Canada. So I think it's becoming mainstream, and people are becoming more aware.
So I definitely want to talk about this awareness, but before we talk about the awareness, like I've heard stories like people that live in these communities, they wake up and the bay there, the area smells rancid, atrocious, rotten, that the sides of the rocks on the beaches, on the shores, get like a film on it. And it's like sometimes like lingering all summer. Is that, how far do you live from the salmon farms?
Well, when I go up to Scotland, I'm there for living in a car, doing covert surveillance. But I've got tip-offs just recently about from locals living cheek by jowl next to salmon farms who are telling me to go into these places, and they're blowing the whistle on the smell and the stench and the welfare abuse inside these farms. So we launched a whistleblower hotline back in May, and we're getting lots of intelligence, not just from locals, but also from salmon farmers themselves. I just got an Instagram post from someone who works for one of the largest salmon farmers in Scotland. And then I've got emails from another salmon farm company, a manager, and they're shocked. So I think once you start getting people blowing the whistle from inside the industry, I think you've got a fucking big problem. Pardon my French.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, what are some of the employees doing? What are some of the insiders doing? Are they are so obviously they're speaking up now too. They're coming out.
They're coming out, and it's some of them had to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. Some of them are fearful for their jobs, so they leak. I've had leaked photographs. One of the photographs behind me up there, that was a leaked photograph from a Maui worker, and there's some other photographs that people leak. And we've had, I sometimes get emails with attachments. I don't know who they're from, but they're from industry insiders. Some prefer to remain anonymous. But the fact is that this industry, 25% mortality in the sea, and people are shocked. Workers on these farms are truly shocked, and I have some sympathy for workers that they go into work and they're faced with mass mortalities, and it's the fault of these big foreign multinationals in Scotland. I'm not being xenophobic. 99% of so-called Scottish salmon is controlled by 5 or 6 foreign-owned multinationals. So there's no such thing as Scottish salmon. And there was a professor at Toronto University wrote a paper maybe 20 years ago saying that we've by farming salmon, we've turned Salmo salar. Now, if you know your Latin, Salmo salar is the leper, so that's wild salmon. We've turned Salmo salar into Salmo domesticus, which is a different species. So by cramming this majestic leper up waterfalls, the Atlantic salmon, the king of fish, by cramming that like a couch potato, like cramming a golden eagle or an albatross in a cage, we've turned the leper into a leper, a disease-ridden leper. So at that base level, just the welfare problem of cramming salmon in cages and the mortality rate, that alone would be enough to rule it off anyone's menu. But then you add the environmental issues, and then you add the food safety issues, and maybe not even food safety, but farm salmon is between 15 and 20% fat. So from a health point of view, it's fattier than pizza. It's fattier than bacon. So thankfully, you've got chefs and key decision makers like yourself and others around the world. And in the UK, we've got the Off the Table campaign where numerous chefs in England, Wales, Scotland are boycotting. They're voicing, they're speaking out against farm salmon and saying, this is not going to touch my lips. I'm not going to serve it to my customers. In Chile, there's a similar campaign. We've had those campaigns in North America as well. So I think that's where we can win the battle, but we need to beam these pictures. We need to take the videos. We need to access photographs through Freedom of Information. We need to tell the story of factory fish farming.
Yes. So now I know at one point I was extremely active on Twitter. I would retweet and link a bunch of these detriments of salmon. And I was getting emails from Marine Harvest and others threatening me with a lawsuit. This was 10 years ago. I mean, they were like really sending me emails and sending me emails. And all I was doing was sharing articles from what had already been published. So it really wasn't my original content. I kept doing it, but I got to tell you, they were relentless in sending me emails telling me that's all nonsense. That's not true. And these are the real statistics here, and cease and desist and stop. So I was only sharing content. You're actually creating content. You're actually there with your camera. You're actually there, there on the front line with them. It must be much more difficult for you. You must be getting threats. You must be entangled in a bunch of stuff trying to deal with these people.
Yeah, this is the MO, the modus operandi of the Sal Mafia, is to try and silence it. It's to try and marginalize. One of my favorite quotes is Mahatma Gandhi said, first they ignore us, then they laugh at us, then they fight us, and then we win. So I think we're kind of halfway along in terms of that battle. And one of the battles for people on the front lines taking this video footage is lawsuits. I've been subject to 3 or 4 strategic lawsuits against public participation. I'm in court at the moment against the world's largest salmon farm company, Maui, who want to stop me taking this footage inside their cages. And the reason they want this footage not to come out is for the reason behind me, the photographs and the video footage in terms of the evidence of welfare abuse. They don't want the public to know, and they're throwing money at lawyers to try and silence myself. They're throwing money at the greenwashing schemes, the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, the Soil Association, the RSPCA. They're trying to welfare wash, they're trying to greenwash themselves. But in the final analysis, the truth always wins out in the end. So, I've got, it sounds really cheesy, but I've got the truth on my side, and I've got an army of people supporting me. And just this year in 2023, I used to subsist with $500, $1,000 here and there, but I got huge amounts of donations from very well respected foundations this year, which has enabled further filming. And I think we're turning the tide, because the more that this video footage comes out, the more evidence there is. And this is against organic salmon farms. This is against responsible salmon farms. So this is supposed to be the best of the best that we're filming inside. And it really is the worst of the worst. When you compare it with other food production systems, it's absolutely shocking. And when you show the footage to other people, lots of people are vegetarian, or lots of people are pescatarian, that they don't eat meat but they eat fish. But I think what Netflix's Seaspiracy did is show that choosing farm fish is a nightmare for environmental reasons, welfare reasons, and food safety reasons. So I think what we're doing is very vital, but we're learning all the time. And we started this because what Alexander Morton did in British Columbia. So I think that has hopefully galvanized other activists around the world. And we would love to see what the state of salmon farms in Maine is, or Newfoundland, or the Faroes, or Chile. We've got Viger, an activist in Iceland, taking video footage. So we'd love to compare and contrast what other salmon farm companies and other salmon farm countries are doing at the moment, because certainly from Scotland, it's dead in the water.
So before we talk about greenwashing, where does all this salmon go, this mortality salmon? All this salmon that dies on the farm, in the farm, all the stuff that's getting trucked off.
Some of it's buried, illegally, effectively in sand dunes in North Uist in Scotland. Most of it's transported away in trucks to be incinerated, and that ends up as electricity in the national grid. Some of it ends up in silage, which may be fed to agriculture. Some of it may find itself into pet food. So
ask about pet food, like where, like when you look at a bag of dog food and it says made with real salmon, I'm like, they're not putting real salmon fillets in there, first of all, and they're definitely not using wild salmon. So I'd have to imagine they're taking all of the scraps, leftovers, whatever they can do, and just make that the salmon in dog food and pet food. I'm assuming that's that, but the mortality stuff is crazy, because you can go onto YouTube and the locals take all these videos of some of those sustainable farms out there just unloading all day long the dead fish and putting it on trucks, and you see pictures that you post and other activists, and you have to just wonder, like, where is this stuff going? So yeah.
Well, I think any industry that can tolerate losing 25-50% of its stock and its share price, you've got Bakkafrost, for example, the Faroese Norwegian-owned company. They issued a profit warning. Scottish Sea Farms issued a warning that there's gonna be a 10,000-ton fall in production. But these companies are racking up not just huge millions of dead fish, but they're racking up millions of losses in terms of money. So how long can shareholders, predominantly in Norway, and banks in New York, support this industry? It's absolute madness.
Yeah.
I think with rising summer temperatures, with climate change, it's going to kill off the industry. And then some environmentalists are suggesting that land-based containment is a solution, but there's no right way to do the wrong thing. You know, if land-based farming is slightly better from an environmental point of view, it might be way worse from a welfare point of view. But even so, you know, the lesser of two evils is still evil. We should not be farming salmon at all. It's at the top of the food chain. You've got a huge ecological footprint. We're draining the world's oceans of wild fish to fuel the expansion, the unsustainable expansion of salmon farming. So we shouldn't be farming salmon at all. There are wild salmon stocks out there as a treat, as a, you know, I used to live in British Columbia and used to live near a fisherman, and Paul Greenberg's book For Fish talks about, you know, how he would eat a fish that he caught, or still eat fish that from a fisherman he knows. So there is still wild salmon out there, but I think from a farm salmon point of view, we should not be eating Scottish salmon, that's all farmed. We should not be eating Norwegian salmon, that's all farmed. And we should be boycotting farm salmon around the world.
Is there actually any Scottish salmon that actually exists, like wild Scottish salmon? Are there any river runs? Is there anything that's happening? Like, because every now and then you hear of some real Scottish wild salmon out there. And what do those numbers look like? Like, I mean, I'm assuming they're going down and down and down. And I know I heard a couple of years ago that there's a lot of sport fishermen that will go upstream and catch the spent salmon. That's, you know, obviously you don't eat the spent salmon, it's already gone up, it's eaten itself inside, it's energy and it's fat and it's spawning, and but like if you're in Scotland, like can you find real true wild salmon on a menu anywhere?
There's no wild salmon on menus in the UK. It's all farmed. Anytime you go to a supermarket and see Scottish salmon, it's from factory farms. Maybe catches of wild salmon in Scotland are maybe 50,000. In terms of farm salmon, you're talking about maybe 50, 60 million farm salmon. So wild salmon's a drop in the ocean. There's catch and release of wild catches of salmon in Scotland predominantly as well. You might get some wild salmon caught on East Coast rivers. That's where there's no salmon farms, and that's where there are still runs of wild salmon in Scotland. People might be catching that salmon and cooking it on a fire by the river for their own consumption. But you know, in the good old days or the bad old days, you used to get lots of poaching in Ireland and Scotland and Norway, where, you know, the local restaurants will be flooded with poached salmon, illegally caught salmon. But those days have gone. You know, we've lost wild salmon as a resource, and we've just been flooded. The market has been flooded with farm salmon. We've still got Alaska, and thankfully, you know, with various decisions, there's no new mine, and you know, there's still a resource there. But in terms of factory farming, you've got Norway, you've got Chile, you've got Scotland, you've got Canada. Around the world, it's expanding and it's moving on to land as well, which, again, as I said, that opens up another can of worms. We should not be farming salmon. This is the king of fish. This migrates across the open ocean. We should not be cramming it in closed containers. This is animal cruelty. It's torture. These are concentration camps for farm fish.
So I know I've heard other people refer to salmon as a keystone species, wild salmon as a keystone species. What exactly does that mean? Like, because the average person doesn't really understand how much wild salmon actually touches the environment. And it's probably more than I even think it touches the environment. But what else is relying upon a true wild salmon? What other animals? What other species? What are the environmental impacts of all of a sudden just getting rid of wild salmon?
There's a great graphic in British Columbia with a salmon and I think 137 species dependent upon it as a keystone species, and humans are one of those. I listened. I used to be on the road with Alexandra Morton, and I listened as she passionately talked about how at the end of the ice age, the humans, we followed the melting ice sheets. We are the people of the salmon. People even the Thames in London or the Clyde in Glasgow. Certainly the Fraser River that runs through Vancouver. These are wild salmon rivers. Humans established towns, cities, settlements. They followed the salmon. So we are the salmon people, but we've lost that. We've lost that culture, that connection. You can still see it when you drive around Canada, when you drive around United States. You can see, towns called salmon. You can see towns described as the capital of the salmon. Yep. Yet the wild salmon is gone. The place name may live on. But what we've learned from around the world is wild salmon can come back. They are resilient. If we remove the dams, if we remove the salmon farms, if we remove things in their way, if we remove industry that's affecting them, they will bounce back. So wild salmon it's a magnificent creature, and it can provide life to the forest, to the eagles, the bears, to humans. So we need to respect wild salmon. And salmon farming, modern salmon farming, shows complete and utter disrespect for this majestic species.
Yeah, 137 different species. Wow, that's amazing. You don't think about it. The salmon swims upstream, a bear eats it, a bear goes to the bathroom. That's fertilizer now for a pine tree or something else. And so it's fascinating how much wild salmon really touches. Now, I heard you say that they're resilient and they can come back. And I also heard you say something important, that in the east side of Scotland, where there's no salmon farms, you'll get some salmon runs there. People always automatically assume, right, here's people's mentality, well, if I eat farm salmon, I'm saving wild salmon. How true is that, if it's true at all?
No, if you want to save wild salmon, we should be boycotting farm salmon. It's counterintuitive to some extent, and the salmon farmers, they make hay. They try the argument that we need to be eating farm salmon to save wild salmon, but it's not true. And you've got Cook, who owns some wild Alaskan salmon farm, salmon industries in Alaska. And they try and talk about salmon as this one species, but as I said before, it's not one species. It's one species with two different biologies. You've got Salmo salar, the wild fish, and you've got Salmo domesticus, and the two are now completely different, and they're inherently incompatible. If we're promoting salmon farming, we're killing off wild salmon, we're killing off wild fish. There's a famous cartoons in newspapers of wild fish swimming past a salmon farm, and then they come out the other side as skeletons, they're dead. There's a famous cartoon in a UK fishing magazine of a happy Scottish fisherman catching lots of fish, and in the background there's no salmon farms in the loch. And then the next picture shows him unhappy, no fish, but lots of salmon farms. It really is that simple. Salmon farming is killing off wild fish. So we need to boycott farm salmon. And hopefully, there are other factors out there, but hopefully wild salmon will bounce back. But salmon farming has spread like a malignant cancer around the world and the coast of the world, and we need to rip it out, and we can get a healthy ecosystem back.
I see that in British Columbia. I see Alexandra Morton posting a lot of positive things there about the wild salmon, the runs returning, some record catches, and the salmon farms are disappearing in British Columbia, if I'm correct, right? They're not renewing the lease.
Yeah, we've won some key battles around the world. Argentina banned salmon farming. Denmark banned open net cage salmon farming. Washington State in the United States banned Atlantic salmon farming. British Columbia has a transition by 2025. So only in 2 years it's supposed to get out of the water. The industry are kicking and screaming and lobbying for all their worth. They're sending their CEOs and executives over from Norway to try and lobby the Canadian government to stop that. But I think you're already seeing, with the removal of salmon farms from key migration routes in British Columbia, you're already seeing an increase in wild fish. So we need to just rip out the salmon farms and life will bounce back.
Yeah, just in 1 year. I mean, we're seeing results. I'm reading all this stuff. So now let's talk about greenwashing, because when you go to a restaurant, some of these chefs say, well, my farm salmon's different. I buy Faroe Islands, I buy Sustainable, I buy green certified, whatever it is, I buy a better salmon. Let's talk the reality about this greenwashing. Are there, like, what's happening with these certifications? Whoever they are, they're putting seals of approval on, or some of these claims, like is there really a sustainable salmon farm?
Put simply, there's no right way to do the wrong thing. So these are greenwashing schemes. They're not independent schemes. The Aquaculture Stewardship Council, for example, which is like the MSC, the Marine Stewardship Council for farm fish, not wild fish, that was set up. That was the spawn of the devil. That was set up by Maui, the world's largest salmon farm company, in bed with World Wildlife Fund, who sold wild fish down the river. So this was a Dutch company that runs the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, and it's not independent. It's an industry scheme, and it's already certified maybe 30% of Scottish salmon farming, but way more around the world, in Norway and the Faroes and Chile and British Columbia. I think the plug was pulled on some farms in British Columbia. I think Maui moved out of the ASC in British Columbia, but it's greenwashing vast tracts of the salmon farming industry around the world. And then you've got the RSPCA Assured, that's the Royal Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Animals, that was set up, and the king or the queen is a patron. That's a respected charity, but they get over £500,000 a year to greenwash, to welfare wash salmon farms in Scotland. So these are money-making greenwashing schemes. You've got the Soil Association that certifies salmon farms as organic. But the common denominator is they're passing off the status quo. It's just a normal salmon farm, and it's just being greenwashed. It's no better than any other farm.
Okay, great. I get, because this is something that I face a lot. I ask a lot of questions when I go out to eat, and a lot of chefs will say, but the chefs ultimately know that farm salmon is detrimental. They know it's not a good product. We may know that, but a lot of us, certain chefs, feel better by saying, well, mine is sustainable, mine's Faroe Island, mine's different. Now, I don't love, but it works for the Faroe Islands, because the Faroe Islands has that their association, and it says raised in the wild, right? You go to the website, raised in the wild, and people go, no, it's wild. No, it's farm raised in the wild. But so is everybody else's salmon. If it's in an open net pen in a bay or wherever it is, it's all farm raised in the wild. So their marketing is truly deceptive. And it works how they've done this, because people don't question, people just assume. And I've had many conversations with chefs that I'm trying to educate, and consumers. Let's look at the website. Here's what it says. there's the bay, there's the mountains, it's beautiful,
Mm.
and there's the net pen inside, this area, but they're still inside of a farm in the wild, which is very, very, very misleading. And a lot of chefs buy into this. A lot of chefs really buy into this. And I know here locally in New York, the vendors are pushing Faroe Island salmon like crazy. And I've had people tell me, well, you're wrong, Marcus. Faroe Island salmon is different. You're wrong, Marcus. Faroe Island salmon is the most sustainable salmon. There's a difference in that. They don't do what other areas do. And at the end of the day, I end up saying, well, there's no right way to do the wrong thing, right? So I just want to address that point that all farmed salmon across the board is, at the end of the day, is farmed salmon. It's all the same. No matter what certification it has, no matter where it's from, no matter how good their website looks or how clever their marketing is, it's all farm salmon. So
Yeah, and some companies and some countries are better at marketing, but it's all greenwash, it's all hogwash. It is deceptive marketing. We've taken numerous complaints to the Competition and Markets Authority for breach of trading standards, breach of advertising standards. There was a successful case a couple of years ago of Lock Jewett, which sell into California. They marketed themselves as the Sustainable Salmon Company,
most
and
sustainable
someone
salmon, right?
complained, and then they had to remove sustainable. So they can't call themselves the Sustainable Salmon Company anymore because it was ruled by the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK as misleading, as deceptive. When I go into a supermarket and see salmon, Scottish salmon or Norwegian salmon, it's marketed, is labeled as responsibly sourced. And we've raised that with the supermarkets, we've raised that with the UK government, and saying it's not responsible. This is irresponsible. But they pay these greenwashers, they pay the advertising, the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, they pay the Soil Association, they pay the RSPCA for these green labels. And it's not just in salmon farming, it happens with chickens and other food products.
It happens with the car industry. The car industry has it, right? 5-star rated for safety. Well, who's rating it? Their own organization is rating it, right? So now Whole Foods here in the US, which people love Whole Foods, and they say, well, I shop at Whole Foods, I buy different food, and Whole Foods has the best farmed salmon because Whole Foods has the same exact nonsense, responsibly raised, certified by this group, certified by that group, certified from our own board of advisors. Some of these places go as far as saying certified from our own internal, their internal standards are better than what these other standards are doing. But the bottom line is Whole Foods needs to sell salmon. And if they can't sell fresh salmon year round in a case, they're in trouble because people are going to go buy salmon somewhere else. They're going to go to a grocery store and buy salmon. So why not have their version of trickery and nonsense greenwashed salmon? And I tell people that it's not any better, the salmon. It's all nonsense.
And yeah, to some extent, Whole Foods are even worse than Walmart because they should know better.
They should. You're right.
If they made the right decision, they would pull farm salmon from them shelves. Greenpeace Target removed farm salmon from the shelves maybe a decade ago, but they quietly put it back on once the pressure from Greenpeace was off. But there's concerted consumer campaigns around the world to try and get supermarkets and retailers and chefs to remove farm salmon from the menu and the supermarket shelves. So the battle goes on, and we're armed with more information, more video footage, more evidence. And I think more and more people are waking up to the fact that salmon farming sucks.
I tell people, I said, out of all of the education in food that I know and that I've taught my kids, because my kids grew up vegetarian, pescatarian, we were very conscious about food.
I'm still there, Marcus.
Okay. I think the biggest disappointment for me is if my kids were to eat farm salmon. I'd feel like, wow, like like that is where my biggest disappointment would come. Out of all the foods that exist out there, farm salmon would be the first on my list to say, wow, I'm disappointed my kids are eating farm salmon. That's how I feel about this product.
Well, when Maui, the world's largest salmon farmer, when they changed the name from Marine Harvest to Maui, the CEO admitted that they changed the name because of negative consumer perception, just like Monsanto changed their name. But Maui are like the Monsanto, the McDonald's of the oceans. And their advertising guru at Maui said, we want to be the Coca-Cola of salmon. That's how mass produced this product is. They're still trying to get that cachet, that price premium in the marketplace, and try and associate themselves with what people perceive to be a luxury product. If you get married and you go to a wedding, on the menu, if you see salmon, you think, oh, that's they must have spent a lot on that. But the salmon option is actually the cheapest when you decide on a wedding menu. The salmon is the cheapest, but people still perceive it to be the most expensive.
Right.
So that's how they're making money. That's how they're profiting, because they're profiting on the disparity, the difference between the rhetoric and the reality and the perception of this wild product, when the reality is it's a factory farm nightmare.
Right. You wouldn't go to a wedding and say, oh wow, look at this basa that's on the menu, or look at this great tilapia that's on the menu. So anything else that needs to be said about this before we finish up? Anything that consumers can do besides just not eat it themselves? Are there organizations they can sign up for? Are there places they can make donations? Are there groups they can join? How do you educate chefs? Is there anything that we can end that's on a positive note of how we can make a difference?
Well, the fact that you, Marcus, are in the vanguard of this with chefs and speaking to other chefs shows that we're making a difference. And I think everybody can make a difference. You can make a difference in your restaurant, and everyone can make a difference in their own family and circle of friends. There's a famous bumper sticker in Alaska and British Columbia that says, "Friends don't let friends eat farm salmon."
Yes, seeing that.
So, we've all got the power on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all this different social media. And I think salmon farming's image has gone from a panacea to a pariah. And I think you're getting to a point in the mainstream audience with Netflix's Seaspiracy. There's various shows coming on different streaming channels. It's been on the BBC. We've seen the New York Times have various exposés. We've seen these books that are coming out into the mainstream audience. So I think the tide is turning. It has turned against salmon farming. And what's going to kill it off is climate change, jellyfish, toxic algal blooms, infectious diseases, parasites. It's going to be dead in the water in the next decade.
All right, Don. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on, and
cheers, Marcus.
Really appreciate the work that you're doing. You're doing a lot of very instrumental work, and I commend you for that. So thank you for exposing what you're doing. It really makes a difference, and I've learned a lot from you over the years. So keep doing that. Learn a lot from you. Learn a lot from Alexander Morton. So when I think of the top salmon activists out there, you're definitely up there. You and Alexandra are top of my list there. So I love your posts, and I try to reshare them on Facebook and just keep educating people. And of course, I'm proud to say 20 years we've been open and we've never served farm salmon. Took a vow before we opened, and I have never served farm salmon in 20 years. So I think that's the biggest accolade over any award that I think we've ever gotten, or any rating we've ever gotten, is just me to be able to have peace of mind and saying, we don't need that. So all right, Don.
Well, thank you, Marcus. You're a star.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. How do people find you?
DonStaniford.org. I've got a new website. Maui tried to take it down, but it's up there. DonStaniford.org.
Staniford, Staniford.
Yeah, find me on Twitter, find me on Facebook, Google me. You can find video footage out there. The truth always wins out in the end. They might try and shut me down. They might try and shut me up. They might try and stop the video footage coming out, but it will find a way, and it will find its way onto mainstream television, into a mainstream audience, and it's there for everyone to see. And they can't stop the truth coming out.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right, I'm there with you. Let me know what I can do to help.
Okay, cheers, Marcus. Bye.